The richest woman in the city sat across from me in a diner that still had ketchup stains on the menus, looked a broke single dad dead in the eye, and begged me to marry her for 30 days. She wasn't joking. There was no smile, no game in it. A woman worth more money than I could count, in a coat that cost more than my truck, sitting in a cracked vinyl booth, asking a carpenter with sawdust still in his hair to become her husband for 1 month so she wouldn't lose everything her family had built. She had it all planned out. 30 days, a signed contract, a number with so many zeros, it made my hands go cold. She thought she knew exactly how this conversation was going to go, because in her world, everything has a price, and she had never once met a man who didn't. What she did not know was that I was about to ask her for something instead of the money. Something so small and so strange that it stopped her cold, and that, by the end of those 30 days, would change what she thought a person could be worth. But before I tell you what I asked for, do me one quick favor. If you have ever been the person that powerful people assume they can simply buy, hit that subscribe button right now. This whole channel is built for the people who turn out to be worth more than anyone guessed. Go on, I'll wait. Now let me back all the way up. Because to understand why a billionaire ended up begging a carpenter in a roadside diner, you first have to understand a half-built treehouse, a little boy who stopped asking questions, and the strangest job offer of my entire life. My name is Jack Donnelly. I am 39 years old and I build things out of wood. I'm a carpenter. I make cabinets. I frame houses. I fix the things in people's homes that other people gave up on. It's honest work and it's hard work, and there is nothing in this world I would rather do, because at the end of a day, you can put your hand on the thing you made, and it's real, and it's solid, and it will outlast you. Most jobs, you finish the day with nothing to show. Mine, I finish the day having made something that wasn't there before. I've never gotten over how lucky that makes me, even when the money's thin, which is most of the time. But I'll tell you something I learned from the wood a long time ago. You cannot rush it, and you cannot fake it. Wood remembers everything. It remembers the man who cut the corner. It remembers the joint that wasn't quite true. You can paint over a lazy job and it'll look fine for a year, and then it starts to come apart, because the wood knew the whole time. People are the same. You can dress them up and paint them over, but underneath, the truth of them is in the joints, in the places where nobody's looking. I've learned to read people the way I read a board. You can tell everything by where they put their care. That right there is most of the story. Everything else is just details. I am raising my son alone. His name is Sam, and he is 7 years old, and he is the reason I get up before the sun every single day. His mother and I were never married. She left when Sam was 2, not in a cruel way, just in the way of a person who realized too late that the life she'd stepped into wasn't the one she wanted. She lives far away now. She sends a card sometimes. I don't speak badly of her to Sam, ever, because a boy should get to make up his own mind about his mother someday, and it's not my job to poison that well. So it's been me and Sam for 5 years, just the two of us, in a little rented house, getting by. Sam is a quiet boy, thoughtful. He used to ask 1,000 questions a day, the way little kids do, about everything. Why is the sky blue? Why do dogs bark? Why did Mommy leave? But somewhere in the last year, the questions slowed down, and then they mostly stopped. And I noticed, because I notice everything about that boy. I think it was about money. Kids understand more than we give them credit for. He'd started to see how tight things were, how I'd go quiet when bills came, how some months we ate a lot of the same cheap meals. And I think he stopped asking for things because he'd figured out that asking made his dad sad, and he loved his dad too much to do that. A 7-year-old should not have to learn that lesson. It's one of the few things in my life I'm genuinely ashamed of, that my boy learned to want less so I wouldn't hurt. There was one thing he wanted, though, that he couldn't quite hide. Treehouse. There was a big old oak in our rented backyard, and Sam wanted a treehouse in it more than he'd ever wanted anything. And I, being a carpenter, being his dad, had promised him one. I'd started it, even, framed out the platform up in the branches on the weekends when I had the time and the scrap wood. But work had gotten thin, and the materials cost money I didn't have, and the half-built treehouse had been sitting up in that oak for 4 months. Just a skeleton, a platform, and a couple of joists. A promise frozen in midair. Sam never said a word about it. He just looked up at it sometimes. That look about killed me every time. Remember the treehouse. It matters later. Now let me tell you how I met the billionaire. Her name was Catherine Vance. The Vance family was one of those names you see on buildings and on the sides of trucks and at the bottom of the news when something big happens in the business world. Vance Industries. 3 generations of it. Old money, the kind that's so old it stops looking like money and starts looking like the weather, just a fact of the world, always there. Catherine was the granddaughter of the man who'd built it, and as of about a year before I met her, she was the one running the whole thing. I met her because she hired me, not for anything grand. Her people called my number, which they'd gotten from someone I'd done good work for, and asked if I could come and repair some antique built-in cabinetry in a house the family owned. Very old, very valuable, the kind of woodwork they don't make anymore, and most carpenters won't touch because they don't know how. I knew how. My father taught me the old joinery, the kind that holds for 200 years. So I took the job. The house was enormous and cold and perfect, and Catherine Vance was there the first day, which surprised me, because people like her usually don't show up for the cabinet guy. She was maybe 40, sharp, beautiful in a tired, guarded way, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than I make in 3 months, and she had the particular stillness of a person holding a great deal together by sheer force of will. She watched me work for a few minutes that first day, said almost nothing, and left. But I noticed something about her. The way you notice a flaw in a board, or a true joint in a sea of lazy ones. When she looked at the old cabinetry I was repairing, her face changed. Just for a second, it softened. There was a grief in it, and I filed that away because I didn't understand it yet. And I've learned that the things you don't understand about a person are usually the most important things. I worked in that house for 2 weeks, and slowly, the way it happens when you're the quiet man working in the corner and people forget you're there, I started to learn things. From the staff, from overheard phone calls, from the shape of Catherine Vance's exhaustion. I learned that the company was in trouble. Not money trouble exactly. Something stranger. I learned it fully on my last day when Catherine came and found me as I was packing up my tools and asked me, in a voice that was trying very hard to be casual and failing, if she could buy me lunch. To discuss, she said, a possible larger project. I should have known something was off. Billionaires do not buy carpenters lunch to discuss projects. They have people for that. But I was curious, and I needed the work, so I said, yes. And she didn't take me to some fine restaurant. She drove us, herself, in a car worth more than my house, to a roadside diner with cracked vinyl booths and ketchup stains on the laminated menus. I think she chose it on purpose. I think she wanted to be somewhere her own world couldn't see her. And once we were sitting there with 2 cups of bad coffee between us, she stopped pretending there was a project, and she told me the truth. Her grandfather, the man who built Vance Industries, had written something into the structure of the company before he died. A condition. Catherine could inherit full control, the whole thing, only if certain requirements were met by a certain date. And one of those requirements, an old-fashioned one, a thing her grandfather had believed in down to his bones, was that the head of the company be a married person, a person with a family. Her grandfather had been married for 60 years, and he believed, rightly or wrongly, that a person with a family to answer to made better, steadier, less selfish decisions than a person alone. He'd watched too many lonely rich men burn things down, so he'd written it in. To take full control, Catherine had to be married. And she was not married, and the deadline was 30 days away. And if she did not meet it, control of the company her family had spent 100 years building would pass, automatically, to a branch of the family she described to me in a flat and careful voice, as people who would strip it for parts and put 4,000 employees out of work without losing a minute of sleep. "I am not going to fall in love in 30 days to satisfy a clause in my grandfather's will," she said. "That's absurd. But I can satisfy it. A real, legal marriage entered into honestly, held for the 30 days the clause requires, and then dissolved quietly afterward once control is secure. I need a husband on paper, a decent one who won't embarrass me, won't sell the story, won't try to take more than we agreed to, one who genuinely needs what I can offer in return." And then she named a number. I'm not going to tell you the number, but I'll tell you it was the kind of number that doesn't feel real when you hear it. The kind that would mean Sam never wanted for anything again. College, a house we owned, a life with no more cheap meals and no more quiet looks at a half-built treehouse. The kind of number that a man raising a boy alone with thin work and a frozen promise in an oak tree has no right to refuse without at least sitting still and hearing it all the way out. 30 days, Mr. Donnelly, she said. We'd share a residence for appearances, separate lives entirely under one large roof. We perform a marriage for the handful of people who need to believe it, and at the end of 30 days you walk away, set for life, and 4,000 people keep their jobs. That's the whole offer. You can say no. Most of what I'm counting on is that a man in your position won't. It was that last part that stung. A man in your position. She'd said it gently, almost kindly, but it landed exactly the way she didn't intend, or maybe exactly the way she did. She'd looked at me and seen my position, seen a man who could be bought because he needed buying. And the worst part was she wasn't wrong. I did need it. God, I needed it. But I want to tell you about the thing that happened in me right then, sitting in that cracked vinyl booth, because it's the whole hinge of this story. I thought about Sam. I thought about the treehouse. And I thought about a promise I'd made to myself a long time ago on the worst day of my life, the day Sam's mother left, and I sat on the floor of our kitchen holding a confused 2-year-old and swore that whatever else I did, I would live a life my son could be proud of when he was old enough to understand it, that I would never do a single thing I couldn't look him in the eye and explain. And I looked at this woman, this powerful, exhausted, frightened woman who had dressed up a desperate plea as a business transaction because a transaction was the only language she trusted, and I understood something about her that she didn't know I could see. She wasn't offering me money because she thought I was worth money. She was offering me money because money was the only thing she had ever been able to count on. It was the only language she knew. Somewhere along the way, this woman had learned that everything has a price, and everyone can be bought, and the only safe way to deal with another human being was to find their number and pay it. And I felt, sitting across from her, a sadness for her that I had not expected to feel. Because a person who believes everyone can be bought has usually learned it the hard way, has usually been bought themselves or sold or watched it happen to everyone they loved. So I did not say yes to the money. And I did not say no to her. I did something else. I said, I'll do it, but not for the money. I don't want the number. Catherine Vance blinked. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely thrown. I don't understand, she said. Everyone wants the number. I'm sure they do, I said. But I've got a 7-year-old at home who's learning to watch how his dad lives, and someday he's going to be old enough to ask me about this. And I'm not going to be able to look him in the eye and tell him his dad married a stranger for a pile of money. That's not a story I can tell my boy. I turned my coffee cup around in my hands. But 4,000 people keeping their jobs, helping somebody who's cornered and scared and out of options. That's a story I can tell him. That one I can explain. She stared at me like I was speaking a language she'd heard about but never learned. Then what do you want? She said. There has to be something. There's always something. And here is where I asked her for the thing that stopped her cold. I want you to come to dinner at my house, I said, once a week for the 30 days, A real dinner at my table with me and my son, not as a billionaire, not as my fake wife, just as a person. And I want you to help me finish building my son a treehouse." Continued in the next part, Catherine Vance did not know what to do with that. I watched her try to find the angle in it, the catch, the hidden price, and fail, because there wasn't one. A treehouse, dinner once a week. That was the whole of what I wanted from a woman who had been prepared to give me a fortune. "A treehouse," she repeated. "A treehouse," I said. "I started it for him months ago. I ran out of money for the wood. It's been sitting half-built in our backyard, just a platform up in an oak tree, this promise I made him that I couldn't keep. And if I'm going to spend 30 days doing something for you, I want to spend a little of it finishing something for him. And I think, if you'll forgive me for saying so, that you could use a few evenings somewhere that nobody's trying to buy or sell you anything. You look like a person who hasn't had one of those in a very long time." She was quiet for a long moment. And then, to my surprise, her eyes got bright, and she looked away fast, out the window of that diner, and she said, in a voice that had cracked clean out of its business-like shell, "All right, yes, a treehouse, and dinner." She laughed, a small, broken, astonished little laugh. "You're the strangest man I've ever met, Mr. Donnelly." "Jack," I said. "Jack," she said. So we got married. Quietly, at a courthouse, with 2 of her lawyers as witnesses, and it was the least romantic thing you have ever seen. 2 strangers signing papers, and afterward she shook my hand. I told Sam that Catherine was a friend who was going to be staying with us for a little while, and that she was going to help us finish the treehouse, which to a 7-year-old was a far more important and believable piece of information than any wedding. He looked at this elegant, expensive woman standing awkwardly in our little living room, and he asked her with total seriousness if she knew how to use a hammer. And Catherine Vance, who controlled a 100-year-old empire, knelt down to his level and admitted gravely that she did not, but that she was a fast learner and would do whatever he taught her. And Sam decided, on the spot, that she would do. For the first week, it really was just a contract. We were polite strangers sharing a roof, except the roof was my little rented house because I had refused flatly to move into her world, and to my surprise she had agreed to come into mine instead. She slept in the spare room. She worked her 18-hour days saving her company. I worked my jobs. We passed in the hallway. It was strange and hollow and mostly fine. A job is a job. But there were the dinners, and there was the treehouse. The first dinner was painful. She didn't know how to do it. She sat at my battered kitchen table, picking at a plate of the simple food I could afford, clearly not knowing how to be a person in a kitchen with a child. And Sam, who is shy with strangers, barely spoke. But Sam asked her partway through why her hands were so soft. And Catherine, instead of being offended, looked at her own hands like she'd never seen them before, and said, "Because I've never really used them for anything. I think that might be a problem." And Sam nodded very seriously, like she'd confessed to a real failing, and said, "We can fix that with the treehouse." And something in Catherine's face came loose, and then there was the building. Every weekend, and a couple of weeknight evenings when she could get away, Catherine Vance came out into my backyard in clothes she'd bought specifically because she was allowed to ruin them, and I taught her to build. I taught her to measure twice and cut once. I taught her to drive a nail, badly at first, bending a whole box of them, laughing at herself in a way I suspected she hadn't laughed in years. I taught her to hold a board true while I fixed it in place. And Sam was the foreman, the way only a 7-year-old can be the foreman, ordering this most powerful woman around his treehouse with complete authority. And Catherine took his orders with a seriousness that made my chest hurt to watch. And the thing happened that I had hoped in some quiet part of myself might happen. The woman who believed everyone could be bought started slowly to thaw. Because you cannot stay frozen around a child who likes you for no reason, who doesn't know or care what your company's stock did today, who just wants you to hold the other end of the board and not let go. Sam cracked her open the same way he cracks everyone open, by kneading her in a way that had nothing to do with money. And the loving it back is what does it. It got her every time. It was on the third week, late, after Sam was asleep, and we were sitting on the back steps, looking up at the nearly finished treehouse in the dark, that I finally understood the grief I'd seen on her face that first day, looking at the old cabinetry. She told me about her grandfather, the man whose will had put us both in that diner. She'd loved him more than anyone in the world. He was the one who'd raised her, really, because her own parents had been the kind of rich people who hand their children to staff. Her grandfather was the one who'd taught her things, taken her to the workshops, shown her how the company actually made the things it made. He used to work with his own hands, even after he was worth billions, in a little wood shop he kept, building furniture nobody needed just for the love of it. That antique cabinetry I'd been repairing, the woodwork that had softened her face that first day, he had built it, with his own hands. It was the last thing of his she had that he'd actually touched, actually made. He believed in this, she said, looking up at the treehouse, building things with your hands for people you love. He used to say it was the only thing that was real, that everything else was just numbers moving around. And I forgot. Somewhere after he died and I took over and the whole weight of it landed on me, I forgot everything he taught me except the numbers. I became exactly the kind of person he was afraid I'd become, the kind who thinks everyone has a price. She turned and looked at me. And then I tried to buy a carpenter, and he asked me to build a treehouse instead. Do you have any idea what it's been like, these 3 weeks, to be reminded of who my grandfather wanted me to be? I didn't have anything to say to that, so I just sat with her, the way you sit with someone when the silence is the kindest thing you have. Now I told you at the start that this is not a fairy tale, and I'll keep that promise even here, because here's what didn't happen. We did not fall madly in love and ride off into a sunset. What happened was slower and quieter, and I think better than that. The 30 days ended. The clause was satisfied. Catherine took full control of Vance Industries on the deadline, and the branch of the family that wanted to strip it for parts was locked out. And 4,000 people kept their jobs and never knew that a carpenter and a treehouse were the reason. The contract said that we would now quietly dissolve the marriage. That was the deal. That was always the deal. And on the last day, the 30th day, Catherine came to find me in the backyard where I was putting the final touches on the treehouse, the little ladder, the railing, the last details. And she stood there for a while, watching me work, the way she had that very first day in the cold, perfect house. And then she said, "It's done. The company, it's safe. Everything worked." A pause. "Which means our arrangement is over." "I know," I said. I kept working. I didn't trust my voice. "Jack," she said, "I don't want it to be over." I stopped. I looked up at her. "Not the company thing," she said quickly. "That's done. That's finished. It has nothing to do with this. I mean the dinners, the treehouse, this, Sam." Her voice was not steady. "I have spent my whole life believing that everyone can be bought, because everyone I ever knew could be. And then I tried to buy you, and you asked me for a treehouse, and for 3 weeks I have been happier in a half-built oak tree in a rented backyard than I have ever been in any building with my name on it. I don't want to dissolve back into the person I was before this. I can't." She stopped. "But I also know I have no right to ask you for anything more, because the one thing I have to offer is the one thing you already told me you don't want." And here is where I did the thing I think is the truest thing I have ever done. I climbed down out of the treehouse, and I said, like Catherine, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as the truth and not as a kindness. I don't want your money. I never did. I told you that in the diner, and I meant it. But somewhere in the last 30 days, you stopped being the woman who tried to buy me, and you started being the woman who learned to drive a nail in my backyard and let my son boss her around a treehouse. And I could fall for that woman. I think I already have. But not like this. Not on the last day of a contract, when you're scared of going back to being lonely. Because I have spent 5 years teaching my son that you don't take the easy thing or the convenient thing. You take the true thing. And I won't betray that lesson, not even for you, not even for this. She looked at me, stricken. So here's what I want, I said. I want you to go, today. The contract's over, so go. Be free of it, no strings, nothing owed. And then, if it's real, if it's not just the fear of the quiet talking, come back. Not as a contract, not as my arrangement. Come back in a week or a month as a person and knock on my door and tell me you want to have dinner at my table because you choose to and not because a clause requires it. And if you do that, I'll be here, and we'll see what we are when nobody's being bought or sold. But you have to leave first. You have to choose it from the outside, freely, or it isn't real, and I won't build my son a life on something that isn't real. It was the hardest thing I have ever said, because every part of me wanted to just ask her to stay. She left that day. She honored it. She didn't argue. I think she understood that I was offering her something better than what she'd asked for, even though it cost us both. And then I waited, and I did not know if she would come back. And those were a long 10 days. She came back on the 11th day. She knocked on my door on an ordinary evening in plain clothes, with no lawyers and no entourage and no contract, holding a bag of groceries because she'd decided, she said, that this time she was going to help make the dinner, badly, because she was a fast learner. And Sam, when he saw her at the door, ran and threw his arms around her like she'd come home, because to him, she had. And I stood in my little kitchen and watched my son hug the woman who'd tried to buy his father and ended up choosing him instead. And I knew I'd been right to make her leave, because watching her come back, freely of her own choice, was worth more than any number with any amount of zeros. We took it slow after that, the real way. We did not rush. We let it be what it actually was, 2 careful, guarded people and a little boy, building something the way you build anything good, one true joint at a time, no shortcuts, nothing painted over. We married again much later, a real one this time, in that same backyard, under the oak tree, with the treehouse finished above us and Sam standing up front as the ring bearer, taking the job as seriously as he'd taken being foreman. I never took $1 of Catherine's money for those 30 days. I want to be clear about that because it's the whole point. When we made our life real, when we decided to actually build something, I told her I would marry her gladly, but that I would keep my own work, my own truck, my own income, and I would never live off her fortune, because the moment I did, I'd never be completely sure again, and neither would she. I'd watched what that uncertainty had done to her whole life, the way she'd had to check everyone who got close for a price tag. I was not going to be one more of those, not even a beloved one. So I kept building cabinets. I keep building them now. Catherine fought me on it, hard, and I won, which is the only argument I have ever won against that woman, and I think she let me win it on purpose, because my refusing the money was the one thing that could finally prove to her, all the way down, that I had never once been for sale. There's a version of that 30 days where I take the number, where I sign the contract and pocket the fortune and walk away set for life, and maybe it even works out fine. And there is no version of that where I do that and also get to sit my son down someday and tell him the truth straight, with nothing bought and nothing owed, about how his dad helped a frightened woman save 4,000 jobs and asked for a treehouse instead of a fortune, and how she came back freely because she chose us. I picked the thing I could explain to my boy. I'd pick it every single time. Sam has a mother now, a real one who shows up, who learned to use a hammer in his backyard, who has never once treated him as anything less than completely her own. I'll never get over watching that happen. A boy who learned to stop asking for things so he wouldn't hurt his dad, learned how to want again because someone came into his life freely and taught him it was safe. And the treehouse still stands in that oak. We bought the house eventually, the little rented one, because neither of us could stand to leave the tree. Sam's getting too big for the treehouse now, but he won't let me take it down, and I never will, because it's the truest thing I ever built. Not because of the wood, because of who I built it with and why. So let me leave you with this tonight. A woman who could buy anything in the world tried to buy a husband and got handed a hammer instead. And it turned out the thing she actually needed was the one thing she'd forgotten couldn't be purchased at any price. She had to learn to build it with her own two hands, one nail at a time, in a backyard, next to a child who didn't know she was supposed to be impossible to reach. So here is what I honestly want to know from you tonight. Has anyone ever tried to put a price on you, on your time, your loyalty, your love? Something that should never have had a number attached to it at all? And did you let them? Or did you ask them for the treehouse instead? What's the thing in your life that no amount of money could ever buy? The thing you'd never sell, no matter the number? Tell me about it down in the comments. I read every single one, and tonight yours is the one I want to read. And if this story found you, if you believe like I've come to believe that the realest things in this life are the ones that were never for sale, then do me one small favor before you go. Subscribe, so the next one finds you too. Leave a like so somebody else who needs this gets the chance to hear it. And tell me about the thing in your life that no one could ever buy. I'll be right here, reading every word.